Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and it's been a hot minute since we talked. And that, my friend, is because I caught COVID and I'm still recovering from it now. So my apologies if my voice sounds weird or any coughing or throat clearing that you might here or anything like that. In this kind of being a short episode, I'm really taking things one day at a time. It's been a very rough 3 weeks and I'm pretty scattered and still having some of those after effects. But enough about me. I want to kind of talk about the garden in this episode and what are some of those things that went well and what didn't, and some potential improvements for next season, because we're definitely on the way into winter here now. There's been some definitely chilly nights, and we're really starting to see that in the garden itself. So I want to start with the tomatoes first, and we had a lot rot on the vine because we weren't able to get out to them and harvest them and process them before they spoiled, with us being so sick. Also, we had lots of problems with tomato hornworms and deer. Those had a grand old feast, and we kind of weren't able to get to a lot of them. But some, definitely did better than others. So we were able to beat the groundhog to some of the tomatoes at least. And there was some obvious clear successes and tomato varieties that way outperformed some of the others. So naturally, I've saved seeds from those early producers, so those plants that had ripe tomatoes that came in before the rest. I've saved seeds from the biggest tomatoes, like the crazy huge tomato that I posted on the Facebook group, the one that was like half the size of my face. I've been saving seeds from those, some of the other really big tomatoes, but specifically those plants that grew a number of big fruits on the same plant. So I took some of those ripe ones and saved the seeds off out of those tomatoes. We had a paste tomato that grew better, like way better than my usual beloved Amish paste, and these other varieties of paste tomatoes did better than the Roma tomatoes too. We also had really good success with tomatoes that were pink, yellow and bicoloured. Those did very well indeed, and the names of those that grew well kind of escapes me right now, partly because my garden journal is playing a game of hide and seek from me. I really hope I didn't leave it randomly in the garden. That would be terrible because we've had a lot of rain recently. But I suspect it's probably somewhere really, sensible that I've left it. Probably not, given that, whenever we can't find something, like we always make jokes about, like, did you look in the freezer or did you look in the pantry? Which seems to be very much where we end up find random things, but that's by the by. But some of those that I think are the ones that performed well were Pawpaw, Supernova, Madison County Pink, Star, Black Icicle, 1884, Mortgage Lifter, Pineapple, Subarctic Plenty and Neptune. And although the Subarctic Plenty was not the varieties that produced ripe tomatoes first, it was a variety that had consistently good yield. So it had good, kind of small slicer type tomatoes that were on there. But it grew a lot of them, and they've produced very consistently throughout the season. I believe that variety is supposed to be determinate, so they're supposed to kind of ripen all at the same time, but that has not been the case in my garden. Even the Romas, which were a determinate variety, that they've all been sort of slowly turning and ripening on the vine. So that's been kind of interesting, because when I grew the Romas in Utah, they ripened all at the same time. So that's interesting for my garden that I've seen. So those are the ones that I think they are, and I'll be sure to post the list in the Facebook group of all of the varieties that I grew out as part of this first year trial in developing my tomato land races, and I'll make sure to actually highlight those that grew well and that have had the seeds saved from them. So I'll confirm that later. And just as we adapt to the land and how to grow food successfully here in Maine, like developing our own land races and seed varieties will help build in that better ability to adapt to the climate, the plant diseases and pests. So I'm saving seeds from those plants which don't show any signs of blight on them, or they don't show other diseases which are prone for that particular plant. And in fact, really, for the tomatoes, only a couple of tomatoes actually started showing signs of disease, and I think a lot of that's because we've had the cool weather coming in. I mean, it was in the upper 30s the other night here, so I'm expecting to see that now. My hubby will not be expecting baskets of green tomatoes for us to process, but I'm thinking things like green tomato and zucchini chutney to make the most of those. Unless you've got some really great bulk green tomato recipes, then please let me know in the Facebook group, because I've got a lot of them and I'm pretty sure they're not going to be ripening now. I could do the trick of pulling up the whole tomato plant and then hanging them upside down to dry out and ripen somewhere. The only problem with that, and the reason why I don't want to do that, is I'm a little concerned about bringing rodents in, and really the only places that I could put that would be the basement, which I really don't want rats and things being attracted to that, because we've got a fieldstone basement, so it's already easy for critters to get in. And then the other place is my husband's wood shop, and he is not going to want to have tomato plants in there. Oh, the barn cats live in there, so I don't know. But I think probably the better thing to do for us would be to harvest those green tomatoes, maybe leave some somewhere sunny on the south-facing windows, maybe on a table, so they can ripen steadily over time, and then process some. I do like myself the occasional fried green tomato, but I think we have got at least a bushel of tomatoes that are out there, probably more. So let me know if you have any good recipes. In terms of the plans, for next season, my apologies for my voice, guys. This is really actually quite difficult to record. But the plan for next season with the tomatoes is going to be to really focus on growing out these seeds that I have saved in the new no-dig garden. I'm not going to be growing over 100 plants next year. I'm probably going to be focusing on 20 to 25 plants at the most. And that's to really give us, plenty of these varieties that have grown well and have multiple of those, because we want to make sure that we've got enough of these to have a lot of diversity and be able to save seeds from multiple plants. But also I want to have a little bit of room to be able to grow out some other varieties to try. So I want to try growing out some of my husband's favourites again, like the purple Cherokee, the black Krim, and maybe also try growing some other short season varieties that might be out there to try, or maybe seed swap with somebody for some other short season varieties. So I want to have some wiggle room to be able to keep trialing things, because that's really what I'm wanting for my land races, those stellar performers within a short season, but I like having different colours and flavours and textures and things. And we make a lot of our tomatoes into sauce, and I think this year's sauce has been the best. What we made before I ended up losing my taste was absolutely amazing, and I'm very happy with that. And a lot of that's come from having this beautiful diverse mix of tomatoes in there. So next year I'll be growing out these ones that have grown well and trying some other ones. Let's talk about potatoes, because they have been very small yields, and most of that has been because the deer came in and ate the foliage on the potatoes. So because they've not had enough foliage to be able to absorb the sunlight, they've really not grown very well. So we've got a lot of baby potatoes, but we planted a lot of potatoes, and even though like the number of potatoes per seed potato planted was small, and they're all very small potatoes, overall we're actually having a pretty good harvest. And sometimes there's plants with good sized potatoes and some small baby potatoes, and really those small baby potatoes are perfect for canning. Canning those up in the pressure canner, or roasting and stuff. They've been great. I'm digging them out slowly but surely. I know I posted in the Facebook group when I actually let you guys know, hey, I'm somewhat back to normal. Somewhat. But it's very, very slow going for harvesting things at the moment, certainly for me. But also the potatoes themselves came down with blight very early in the season, and I was really astounded that the tomatoes were spared and didn't get it. But for potatoes next year, I'm definitely going to be looking for some dependable blight resistant varieties that I can get here in Maine, and I'm also going to go back and look for the Purple Viking variety again. We didn't grow it this year, and I originally grew it in Utah as a novelty, but it ironically turned out to be one of our favourites, and we really missed having it to eat this year. So that variety is going to go back on the list. And really, as you're going through your garden and reflecting on what worked and what didn't and what you want to grow again, it's a really it's a good idea to start listing your seed shopping, so you know what it is when that seed catalog shows up or that email comes through to let you know, hey, we're starting to take orders and stuff. Exactly what you need to get, right? That's one way where we can somewhat rein ourselves in with our gardening hobby, is knowing what it is that we need versus a want. And speaking of needs, garlic orders should be starting now for a lot of seed companies, and the bare root fruit, nut and berries are also going to be starting. So know what it is that you need, so you can budget and buy those before they sell out. The last thing that you want to do is try and buy everything, and then you're stuck with, what am I going to do with all of this? Where can I put it? You want to, certainly when it comes to your orchard type of things, go slow, figure out where it is that you're wanting to put things, and make sure that you've got things that are going to appropriately cross-pollinate. So, I've got a oh dear, I'm terribly sorry. I've got a whole list of things sitting, waiting for me to, hit the go button on for fruits, nuts and berries this year. But actually I'm going to be doing something a little different, and sitting down with my husband and going through hey, these are the things that I've shortlisted. What are the things that, we're both wanting from this property, and what's going to make the most sense for us, because certain things, like certain nuts, like walnuts and things, they can take 10, years, 20 years before they are actually producing a harvest. And certainly if you are older and listening to this, that might not be something that you are going to, get a benefit from. It might be something that other members of your family do, or, if you sell the property, other people who end up living here. So there's a few things like that we want to discuss. We definitely want to get some more American chestnuts because we have an American chestnut on our property, and we want to have some other plants growing there to help with some pollination and really see that tree that we have there being able to reproduce and thrive. So that'll be good. But when it comes to apples, I have got a lot of apples and a lot of pears, and a lot of peaches and plums and blueberries, and I have a lot of stuff going in there. But going through them with different family members and having like their input on it, like for apples, is it an apple that they like the sound of the description? Is the use of the apple something that you are likely to actually use, right? Are you going to be making cider? Does cider apples make sense for your family, or should you just more get fresh eating apples? Do you not really like fresh eating apples, but you prefer to cook them, right? So having some of those discussions, but also, is the actual fruit, like looking at the fruit, something that you are likely to want to eat? Like for me, I love russets and the pippins and Bramleys. Bramleys are like a massive cooking apple that are very popular in the UK. I've never seen them here, and I keep looking for my Bramley seedling tree so I can have one over here. But things like Granny Smith apples are eating apples in the UK. They're not a pie apple particularly. So like when I'm looking for cooking apples, I'm looking for things that are kind of, sharp. They've almost got like an effervescent kind of taste to them. So I'm looking for something a bit different in my cooking apples versus something that my husband and my family are looking for. So anyway, I digress. But that is something that, even with seeds, and you're looking at things that grew well in your garden and things didn't. Did you try a new variety of something and you didn't really like how it tasted, or you didn't really like, the shape of it, or, it was, a different, it looked completely different from what you were expecting, and you didn't really find it appealing to eat. For example, maybe you had a very warty squash that was growing and you really didn't want to eat it because it looked like something was wrong with it. That's totally fine. And it's having those kind of conversations with family members that will not only, help them be involved within the process of you deciding what it is that you're going to grow, but also helping them be comfortable with trying something new in terms of fruits and veggies and things. There was a variety of something that I grew, and it might have been, was it eggplant? Maybe might have been eggplant. I think it was an eggplant, and it, like, the colour of it wasn't very appealing for my family. It didn't look like it was ripe. I think it was like one of those green eggplants, and it was hard to tell whether it was ripe or not. So it just kind of sat on the vine and didn't really do anything. And I mean, it was a variety that we'd picked up at a store. It was like one of those potted transplants and stuff, but we never even ate it because we couldn't tell when it was ready to harvest. So I mean, things like green tomatoes and stuff like that, I tend to stay away from those varieties that are green, just because it's hard to tell when they're ripe. And certainly if you're sending out a family member to help harvest stuff and they have no idea what it is that they're looking at, having things that are easy to tell, like, okay, this tomato is red, this is ripe, this one's yellow, this is ripe, it might have been a great white tomato, now I come to think of it, rather than an eggplant. And yeah, we just couldn't tell whether it was ripe or not, or it looked like there was something wrong with it, so nobody really ate it. But you know, for another family, those are qualities that you might be looking for. You want something unusual, and you know, you really enjoy the flavors and things of those. Remember, it's your garden and it's your homestead, and you know, you grow it and grow the things in it that you want to see. Let's talk about corn. Corn did not fare well for me this year at all, and I suspect it's because, number one, I got the corn out in the ground too late and I grew it directly from seed in the ground. I also got out my winter squashes late and they didn't grow. So I think getting the seed out late, but also a lack of watering during those early stages really meant that we have not got anything to eat in terms of corn. If I had some chickens and stuff, there's a little bit there, you know, for them to kind of have as a snack. But we do have plenty of carbon-rich material for the compost heap this year. So, you know, that's a bonus. It's not all a complete waste. But for next season, I'm going to be looking for short season sweet corn varieties and short season popcorn. I'm likely to source corn seeds directly here in Maine, so that some of that climate adaptation is already shared in the seeds, and that's kind of what I'm looking for as I'm creating these landrace varieties, is I want things that adapt and grow well here. So by getting seeds like from a company here in Maine means that I'm more likely to have some of that, you know, adaptability to this short season and the climate. I also think that growing in the more fertile, moisture retaining, no dig garden beds are going to help. I have a number of corn seeds for field corn, so things like flower corn and dent corn varieties. I won't be growing those out until, you know, we have consistent livestock, because it's primarily going to be a feed for the livestock. But also, I don't want to be growing those until we've got our kitchen remodeled on, because, you know, I want to be able to have a place where I can actually process the corn, turn it into flour, and then, you know, cook with it. You know, that's going to be the best way to do it. I mean, I've got these beautiful, like, blue flower corn things and all of these great ideas of what to do with it, but I don't want to grow it and then not have a place to actually process it and use it. So, that's a good tip for you to consider for your garden next year. Like, is this something that you have, you know, you're able to grow, but also is this something that you actually have the things in place to be able to use? Like sorghum, for example, you know, you can eat the seeds from sorghum as a grain, but also the canes themselves can produce syrup, and it's delicious. And you know, do you have the things in place to be able to process those canes to turn it into syrup, or is that something else that you've got to invest in? Now, one big success that I had this year was I was finally able to grow a summer squash, and this particular variety, Gelber English or custard, I have been trying to grow for at least 5 or 6 years. So I'm really happy I was able to grow it well here. I've got a couple of fruits sitting on the plant that I'm hoping to save seeds from, but I don't know, because it's been, you know, we've had some real cold weather over the last couple of nights. I might just have to buy new seeds, as I've got none left now. But I know it doesn't necessarily sound like I'm really excited, but I am very excited that those finally grew, and they were so good. I'm also really happy to see that Romanesco, Cocozelli, Black Beauty and Golden Zucchini all grew very well. They're producing now, so they're producing a lot later in the season than like the zucchini that my neighbours had. That grew a lot earlier in the season, but they grew things from transplants. and they had much maturer plants going out into the ground, whereas I grew directly from seed. My neighbours also were very flush with beans this year. My beans finally gave me a couple of handfuls to harvest yesterday, so that was very, very exciting for me, and they were delicious. I was eating a couple of those straight off the vine. But my neighbours have been flush with beans all this year, so I'm going to be seeing about getting the same variety that they grew, and I want to see how those grow for me next year as well. Melons and watermelons have died back since the temperatures really dropped on a night, and really only 2 of the melons that we've had have been edible. I saved the seeds from those that were edible to grow next year. The watermelons I'm leaving a little bit. I've had to pull them off the plant because the plants died back. But I'm going to be leaving them a little bit more before I open them up, just to see if I can get the seeds to mature a bit. The plan is for next year that I'm going to be sowing these saved seeds to help develop a variety that will grow and produce fruits in the short season. After a couple of seasons of doing that, I should be able to start saving seeds from fruits that have the beginnings of the taste that I'm looking for. Right now I can't taste anything still, so I'm just saving seeds anyway, and then I will look to saving seeds from things that tasted really good a little bit later in that landrace development and seed selection process. That's just how I've got to adapt and save seeds this year. Normally I would be saving seeds from things that, grew and tasted good, but right now I'm just having to look at, did it grow? So that's a little crazy adaptation that we're having to make at the minute. Peppers have been very interesting this year in the garden. We have had a great harvest of hot jalapeno peppers and some other varieties that I grew that were very hot and spicy, unexpectedly so. Like, my husband would often go out into the garden, pick a jalapeno, and he'll just eat it fresh off the plant. And he did that with some of the others, and there was some like teeny tiny peppers that we had, and he kind of like grabbed one of those thinking that, we'll just see how this was, and it was a bit of a face melter for him. So we've had some interesting varieties that were super, super hot. So he was very, very happy. We've even had poblano peppers grow well for us this year. So my husband has been a very happy boy. Our tomatillos grew. We've had a good couple of harvests off those, and our CSA grew tomatillos as well, so he has been able to make fresh salsa and enjoy it. So he has been super happy about that. The critters unfortunately ate our sweet peppers, so I have not had a harvest of sweet peppers. Judging by the hoof prints, it has been the local deer that have eaten our sweet peppers, and that leads me to some general improvements for the garden next season. And the first improvement is that we really have to put up a fence to keep out the groundhogs, the porcupines, and the deer. I mean, we've lost all of the brassicas, so all the cabbages, all the kale, all the broccoli, all of the cauliflower, all of that got eaten by the deer, as did the beets, the chard, and the lettuces. And we have been sharing tomatoes with the critters as well. So having a fence up is going to help keep those out. The other general improvement, and this is one that my husband is not going to want to hear, and that is that I really need to be starting more plants indoors and earlier. Now, with some of the more hardy and cold tolerant veggies like the cabbage and the kale, I'm going to be able to do winter sowing for those. And paired with the fence, we might actually have them grow into something when planted early in the season rather than just being eaten. But the usual indoor starts like peppers, okra, eggplant, tomatoes, I'm probably going to be starting some of those a lot earlier. Onions are another thing I'm going to be trying to figure out how those grew, or how to grow those a little better, because they did not fare very well in my garden. I think a lot of that was due to the watering issue. But I think if I can at least start things like the peppers and the eggplant and okra a few weeks earlier than what I normally would have started them, that would be better. So I've got more robust plants, bigger plants going outside. I'm also going to need to be starting squashes, cucumbers, melons, watermelons, and even corn indoors to transplant outside. That's where my neighbours had, good successes. They were transplanting a lot of stuff, and they had much bigger plants that were going outside after that risk of frost. They did a lot of their hardening off on a porch, on a sheltered porch. So if we can kind of find a better place to have our plants go through that hardening off process, because the backside of my house is north facing, so that wasn't a good place for them to be. It's also kind of like a giant wind catch. However, I do have a porch area that is on the south side, and it is sheltered in there because it's like a throughway to the wood shop, so that might be a good place for me to harden some things off during the day, but we'll figure that out later, probably in late spring when we're needing to do that. So luckily having a seed starting schedule, that is going to help, because I can increase the number of weeks before the frost for a particular plant, and I can set the timings for how my climate and my garden needs things to grow. So for instance, where I've got start my, let's say my peppers, I have starting 8 weeks before the frost. I might move that to 12 weeks before the frost. So I've got an extra, 4 weeks of growth before those plants are going to be going out. Now, it does take a little bit more, a bit more time on your part, because you're going to have to transplant things out of your seed module into a small container and then into another bigger container. Like plastic cups and things work very well for that. But we're going to have to do a little bit more of that. However, the payoff is that I've got bigger plants that are going out, and they're more likely to be producing throughout the season and stuff. So we'll see how that works. But if you haven't seen that video, I put it up on YouTube, and I will put a link in the podcast description for that. It does take time to put together a seed starting schedule, and it honestly isn't the most enjoyable homesteading task. It can be a little boring. I mean, you're working with a spreadsheet, you're having to look at all your seed packets and stuff, and, do some searches while you're doing it. But the payoff is that it's going to help you be organized for your next season. So it can really kind of help with honing in like what you're needing to be planting, when things need to go out, when you can resow and all that good stuff. So I definitely think it is an asset to my homestead, and really helps me keep on top of things, especially when you're busy doing work and everything else. So let me know over in the Facebook group what grew well for you and what didn't grow well for you, and what some of your changes for your next gardening season will be for your homestead garden. Until next time, I hope your garden grows beautifully, and I'll see you all next week, hopefully with a better voice. Until then, have a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you all soon.